Quick thing to know, I didn't finish editing this video, because I didn't want to. So most stuff in this video doesn't include all the assets I intended, and about 10 minutes in, the visuals become super low effort. All the audio is ready to go though, which is why I'm still uploading this. And also, I wrote everything in this within the first 2 days of the season, and I haven't kept up with the story since. So if anything's outdated, hopefully it's ignorable. If you want more of an explanation for my laziness, click on the top link in the description. And for those of you who don't care, sorry for wasting your time, but you did just click on a 40-minute long video about the Fortnite storyline, so you don't seem to care about your time anyways. Enjoy this half-baked video, I guess. Here we have the swarmer, and it's not especially a natural habitat. I'm pretty sure it's actually an invasive species. I have a lot to say about these bugs actually. Who would have thought I'd return to Fortnite theories? Well, I actually really like ecology and entomology and decomposers and all that. And I got into it because of Fortnite. So, of course, when it becomes the main focus of the storyline, I'm gonna care. Anyways, you must be wondering, what even is there to say about these bugs I can connect back to real-world biology? And I say that's a loaded question, so let's get started. Here's the swarmer, the most common bug. As the Fortnite blog puts it, the most common is the bottom feeder, the swarmer. They'll bog you down if you don't take them out quickly. As the name suggests, they gather in swarms. Notably, there are actually two kinds of these swarmers. The large ones that attack you, and the smaller ones that circle the nest. I believe the large swarmers are a new form of these bugs. They started off small, but with a hefty food source such as the tentacle, many of them grew an incredible amount. The best real-world comparison I was able to draw between the swarmers and a real species would be beetles, or at least some sort of decomposer, but carrion beetles would be the best pick. Just from a writer's perspective, I'm assuming not much thought was really put into the species or breed of these bugs, but I can definitely see the functions of real bugs giving us a good foundation for the behaviors we can observe in these fictional ones. Carrion beetles typically feed on organic matter, such as animal carcasses, and because of that, they're labeled as decomposers. This is just like what the swarmers did when the dead tentacle landed on the island. That large amount of meat is sure to attract decomposers, and it clearly did. However, the island's ecosystem isn't built for otherworldly seafood, leading to a great ecological shift. I believe these bugs could have existed under the island already, feeding on smaller, more fit for their size food storage. But the invasive artifact of the tentacle has given them so much more to feed on, allowing them to invade the island and take control swiftly. So am I saying these bugs aren't from the spirit realm or directly from the demons? Yes I am. But we'll get into that later. Next we have the bomber. The Fortnite blog describes them as follows. Near the nest, you'll find hefty bomber bugs on guard. These chonkers like to burrow and pop up behind you before letting loose a goop blob from afar that you really don't want to catch a whiff of. This is actually very similar to the real-world bombardier beetles, which are similar by name already. Bombardier beetles spew out a harmful chemical mixture from their bodies as a defense mechanism, just like the bombers. Some bombardier beetles also burrow underground. Considering their size and similarity to the swarmers, as well as the fact bombardier beetles are also decomposers, these bugs probably also fed on the tentacle. They're just a different faction of the hive. Next is the roly-poly, which has a pretty self-explanatory name. They can be used as an item to let you roll. Now, I know the name speaks for itself, but I dare say that's only cosmetic as a quirky item name. I mean, at the end of the day, roly-polies aren't mutated purple bugs, so it can't just be a roly-poly. I actually dare say these are more similar to carrion beetle larvae, considering I've already drawn a connection to the carrion beetles. And they're probably also an important decomposer that feeds on the tentacle. Lastly, there's the queens. The Fortnite blog describes them as follows. Queens are massive slugs, taller than most buildings. They'll surface after you've rid their nest of bugs. Then they'll summon their grimy kin and try to body slam you something fierce. The blog calls them slugs, and I don't see it. I think that's just OXR talk, really. I don't have a beetle to relate these to. They really just look like a very mutated caterpillar, which wouldn't make sense because if they're the queen of those other bugs, why would they be a caterpillar? Whatever, this is the part where I give up on logic and just accept that it's just a cool design, so they used it despite the inconsistency. Anyway, in the end, they're the queen of the bugs, which explains why they're by far the largest and hidden underground until you've killed enough of her offspring to get her attention. She's probably fed a ton of the tentacle, which might explain why she's so hard to identify. She's a whole new evolution. So there are all the bugs. Now let's look at their nests. These definitely lean more on the fantasy side considering their colors, but I can make some sense of them. They remind me a lot of termite mounds, and notably, termites are decomposers. Here's the interesting thing about them, though. the liquid and ooze. They're making slurp. Natural slurp. Or I guess as natural as it gets with the invasive situation. Throughout the Fortnite storyline, we've seen slurp be manufactured, such as with Slurpy Swamp. But these bugs do it themselves. Something about their digestion must make what they eat turn into slurp. This is pretty similar to how decomposers break down dead organisms and release the nutrients from them back into the atmosphere, which other organisms in the ecosystem that need those nutrients can't do themselves. The overall ecosystem needs those nutrients to stay running, as they're essential for the rebirth of plants and food for animals. So, what role does slurp play in the ecosystem of Fortnite? Well, this is far from the first time we've seen slurp emerge naturally, and that was with the Reality Falls biome in Vibin. The place was littered with slurp mushrooms, large shield mushrooms, and a whole lot of plants that generally looked like they were related to slurp. Slurp can be naturally produced, but the fact it was a biome formed when the 0 point was free intrigues me. It leads me to the question, what really was happening with the 0 point back in Vibin? I think these bugs have given me the answer. First, I need to get out of the way what exactly the decomposers are feeding on in the organic waste that create slurp. Let's compare slurp to the nitrogen cycle, a cycle decomposers play a crucial role in. Let's start with animal waste and the nitrogen cycle. Animal waste is broken down into ammonia by decomposers. Then it turns into ammonium, which plants consume. Those plants then turn that ammonium into organic nitrogen compounds that sustain the plant. Then the ant can be eaten by a primary consumer, which will then turn into organic nitrogen compounds that sustain the consumer. Then, when the primary consumer dies or excretes waste, the cycle repeats. With what we currently know about the slurp, here's its version of the nitrogen cycle. Organism waste is broken down into slurp by the bugs, which plants consume. Those plants then turn that slurp into organic slurp compounds, which could be a type of 0 point energy that sustains the plant. And then the plant can be eaten by a primary consumer. Then, when the primary consumer dies or excretes waste, the cycle repeats. So, what's the primary consumer and chemical compound it creates? I believe the compound is 0 point energy, like I mentioned, and the primary consumers that create this are the rift butterflies. The 0 point energy held in the tentacle from the zero shard in the spirit realm is exactly what attracted the bugs. It seems to me that the rift butterflies, slurp plants, and the new bugs are essential to the ecological balance of the 0 point. Contained in the balance of reality are two powers, darkness and light. We've seen them fight consistently in the frame of the Fortnite storyline. With what I'm learning here today, it seems like each of those powers have tangible variants that flow through reality. The sideways for darkness and slurp for light. The sideways is heavily destructive, and slurp is heavily reconstructive. Slurp's healing ability is probably why there is so much artificial slurp being pushed on the island. It's powerful and useful. This also mirrors how, in real life, humans have recreated how decomposers deconstruct chemical compounds to get the useful nutrients out of waste. So now, it's time for me to talk about the last reality's role in this, since of course I have to if we're going to talk about darkness and the sideways. To me, it seems like the last reality are decomposers themselves, and they genuinely do need 0 point energy to live. Specifically, they need the dark energy and the 0 point energy to live. I believe this is the same for the bugs. The bugs are noticeably purple, the notable color of darkness in the Fortnite storyline. And I'll even point out how they look like something that come from the last reality. These bugs create hives full of slurp, but never darkness. Instead, the darkness is what feeds them and sustains them. They consume the 0 point energy and break it down into sideways and slurp. Then they feed on the sideways and use it to grow, while the slurp is sent back into the environment. So, basically, slurp is bug piss. Awesome. That's what fertilizes the plants though. You can even see how the increase in slurp has affected the grass now and before. Currently, the grass around the hives is a bluish green, just like it was back in Reality Falls. Though notably, there was quite a bit of purple grass and flora in Reality Falls too. We're back to figuring out what was happening with Reality Falls. And now, I think I can fully jump into it. When the 0 point was freed from the Imagined Order, new otherworldly flora flooded the island. It was an ecosystem coming to life because of the 0 point. But why? We now know that the bugs feed on the darkness and the 0 point energy and break it down into sideways and slurp. The same could be the case with the last reality. So was the increase in slurp flora on the island a result of the ecosystem's decomposers? Checks out. There was a whole lot of rift butterflies flying around Reality Falls. They must have been leaving a lot of 0 point energy behind. Decomposers would then break down the 0 point energy. Something important I should add is that fungi are very prominent decomposers, which says a lot about the shield and slurp mushrooms, and especially all of the ones that were in Reality Falls. They could also feed on darkness while storing excess slurp, which is what gives them their healing boost. So, following that, the plants in the biome, such as the grass, would consume the slurp and maybe also the darkness consumed by the fungi spread through the roots and began affecting the color of the trees in the grass, causing the purple colors. The plants would then create their slurp compounds, their food, and then the rift butterflies would turn that into 0-point energy, and the cycle repeats. A healthy ecosystem, right? Well, not if you have a gluttonous, darkness-thirsty legion behind it. She's right behind me, isn't she? The last reality saw this rich source of 0-point energy and quickly took it for themselves, turning it into dark energy to give them power. The chrome is their tool in this. And holy honk, I have a lot to say about chrome. Chrome derives from chromium, which is the same thing the spire in Primal was made out of. This is heavily implied in the Paradise story trailer, where you can see the Seven comparing the chrome structures to the spire structures and a picture of the chemical structure of chromium, specifically chromium picolinate, which, unfortunately, my best answer to the relevance of chromium picolinate is that the artist behind that graphic simply looked up chemical structure of chromium on Google and picked one of the best looking photos, which would be this image of the chromium picolinate structure. Yes, you need to have a degree in chemistry to do graphic design apparently. I say this because picolinate is very mundane and has no real reason for its relation to chrome. Hexavalent chromium, on the other hand, is toxic, threatening, distinctly shiny, and hexagonal, which sounds like chromium to me. Now, let me take some time to talk about the spire since it's important to this, and frankly, very unclear. During Zero Crisis, when the Foundation is inside the 0-point and the bloom fails, Jones states,
"He must be sealing himself in,"
which I can say is at the very least referring to him closing off the shards of the 0-point, trapping himself inside. As for the spire, it's extremely hard to understand how natural it is. The Foundation's AI states in the 0-point comics the following. The 0-point was breaking down. You created a structure around it, enclosing it within a spire. I guess you could assume by the wording that this means the Foundation has the power to form the spire, but is that an ability of his own, or did he simply trigger a process based on the 0-point's instincts by closing the shards and not allowing the blast to happen? In his animations and abilities as a boss, we do see him somewhat conjure a boulder full of energy that explodes on impact using some sort of blue power. We've seen him use this blue power before with his punching abilities. So, if anything, it just seems like a power that allows him to gather material and send power through it, which could be how he was holding on to the 0-point shards. As the spire forms, we do see a lot of blue energy in the path it forms in, similar to how the Foundation conjures his boulder ability. What confuses me, though, is the very nature of the spire. Obviously, it is unnatural by the fact it has a staircase around it, which could have been purposely formed by the Foundation to allow Jones up so he could seal off the 0-point with the device. But then, where did the chromium come from? We know it's made up of chromium from the Chapter 2 Season 6 bonus styles and the Chapter 3 Season 4 trailer, where we can see the spire structures labeled as chromium with the chemical structure of chromium displayed on screen, like I said. So where did it come from? And where did the Guardian Outpost come from? And why do they have staircases and logos from the IO imprinted on them? Why in the Spire concept art did it literally have the IO logo on it? What is the Spire? Okay, geez. Let's take a hot minute to unpack everything. I warned you, it's very unclear. Let's go back to the chrome and the spire chromium. They both form pretty similarly. They even solidify similarly to how they reach out of the ground in a crystal-like format, only that the chrome seems much more advanced. Also, in the Batman 0-point comics, it's said that the spire is extremely dangerous to be around, which supports the idea that the chromium is meant to be hexavalent, since it's very carcinogenic. So let's look back at Zero Crisis when the spire was forming with some hypotheticals, because that's just the best I can do right now. Let's say the Foundation did build up the spire, just not the chromium. In his boulder ability, we don't see him specifically make chromium. Instead, he is simply gathering rock materials that surround him, which could mean the chromium was already forming. Let's use the same system of looking at real-life systems to understand this. Chromium derives from chromite, an ore that is formed from cooling magma that primarily contains chromium and iron and typically exists around volcanic areas because of this. When the spire is forming, we see it built up in a magma-like hot state, and then it cools. So I suppose iron and chromium were present. The Foundation gathered them into magma and cooled it into the chromite spire. So then, yes, chromium was already there. Why? I have an answer. My main theory about why the chromium appeared is that it's a natural function of the 0 point. If the chromium is really that toxic, it could provide safety for the 0 point from any predators while it's endangered. There's a problem with that though. Hexavalent chromium is harmful to plants, and as I'll explain later in this video, the 0 point has a lot of connections to plants. One example of this would be the reality bloom. The 0 point may protect itself, but it damages its ability to heal. This doesn't mean this theory is false though. Since I understand this function as a last-ditch effort the 0 point could pull in the hopes that it could eventually be saved by an outside force. We have also seen the 0 point in a petrified state in Chapter 4 Season 3, and the shell around it looked pretty similar to chromium. Both when the spire was formed and the 0 point was petrified, the 0 point was in a dormant state. We have seen the 0 point dormant one other time, during Paradise. At this point, the 0 point wasn't sealed in chromium, but still, chrome arrived. There definitely seems to be a large difference between chromium and chrome, even if they share molecule structures. As the scientist puts it, I've never seen such accelerated cytokinesis. It seems like at some point, the last reality caught wind of the toxicity and function of the chromium and turned it into chrome as a bioweapon. If I'm right about the chromium being a natural function, that could explain why the Herald is so similar to the reality tree. The reality tree seems to be an extension of the 0 point. I'll explain more of this later. The chromium would also be the reality tree's last-ditch effort, meaning to an extent it can control it. The last reality must have taken this control to an extreme, which makes sense to me. Scientists are constantly looking into ways to make use of biological processes. Plants are used in plenty of medicines. Of course, the last reality could do similar research to make use of the 0 point's functions. The Herald's powers to control the chrome, combined with her reality tree-like form, tells me she was probably specifically biologically made to be able to control chrome through the same last-ditch function the 0 point has. The last reality must have figured out the instincts that led to the function and turned it into a weapon. With this said, this completely explains what the Herald was doing during Fracture when she was damaged. When she is shot at, chrome forms, like how when the 0 point is in danger, chromium forms. And when the Herald is damaged too much, she turns into a gigantic, last-ditch chrome state where she is almost entirely covered in chrome, to deliver a final blow to the reality tree. After this, the chrome fully covers her and solidifies, just like the 0 point does with chromium. So, that was a lot. I had to nab a lot of that from a script I wrote back in February, which I think the lengthy, confusing nature of it explains why I didn't feel like finishing the video. Now let's go back to talking about the chrome's role in the slurp cycle. It seems like the last reality do a lot of exploiting of the 0 point's functions. They probably drained all the sideways in the slurp from the biome, using the darkness for their power, and using the slurp for their own darkness farms that exploit the slurp cycle, which, based on their terraforming and invasion and plain reason, I strongly believe they have. This is why in Paradise, the reality tree biome was withered and decaying, completely stripped of its nutrients. The slurp cycle was ruined, or more so, relocated for the last reality's gain. And this would trigger the chromium as the 0 point's defense mechanism, which the last reality has mastered, as they've probably done this many times before. Since we're talking about the last reality, I also want to point out the roles of the cubes in all of this, especially the blue cube. Of course, I'd expect it to come to mind when I've been talking so much about the functions of light and dark in the Fortnite storyline, on top of slurp and sideways energy both being extractable from 0 point energy, because the blue cube has shown similar behavior. Let's look at how the cube behaved in the Skyfire event. The cube originally appeared purple and destructive, attacking the players. This is for sure the sideways, as we've seen with cubes plenty of times. Then, Sloan weaponizes the packs of the players, sending out a shockwave that turns the cube dormant and monochrome. I advise you to look closely at the detail of the cube almost sort of shedding its glyphs when this happens. If you look closely at the cube following this, its glyphs are completely gone. Then, after Sloan has a moment of aura, the players go to reboot the cube, turning it light blue. Look at the liquid here turning into a light blue with a somewhat greenish tint. It looks very similar to Slurp. Additionally, once the blue cube landed on the island, it would give players shield when they touched it. When the cube is finished rebooting, it has a brand new set of glyphs. I haven't seen enough people talk about the fact that the cube's glyphs had changed when it got rebooted. To me, this definitely reads like the glyphs act as code for the cubes. The cubes at their core are neutral, able to emanate both light and dark energy, but outside sources can fix them to one side by inputting glyphs. The last reality uses cubes to spread darkness, but something about the loopers in that situation allowed them to recode the cube to spread light when they touched it. But how? Let's review our knowledge. The bugs can separate 0 point energy into the sideways and the slurp. And if I'm right about the last reality being decomposers too, so can they. The cubes are probably directly given 0 point energy in some way, which powers them, and then the last reality fixes them to the sideways setting. But that slurp side is still always there, ready to be awakened if given the proper settings. So where does the last reality get its 0 point energy from? Rifts. often rift butterflies, as we saw one released when the original cube exploded. And as I said, rift butterflies are a main part of what turns Slurp back into 0-point energy. They're holding plenty of it. Additionally, in the Cube Queen's introduction trailer, she crushes a butterfly and spreads its remains. And once that happens, caretakers come bursting out of the ground, almost as if the rift energy gave them the power to form. Oh. Oh my. Oh my, it all makes sense! Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just realized my theory makes the plotline of the original cube make so much more sense. We saw the original cube form from a rift. The rift was originally neutral, but turned purple over time as it became smaller. Probably caused by an outside source such as the last reality turning it into a weapon of the sideways, like how I said they're able to code the cubes. Once it was primed, the cube formed off the 0-point energy from the rift and in the dark setting, and the last reality hit the jackpot with this one. Lucky for them, the 0-point itself was under the island, and they'd find it at Loot Lake. This would hold so much potential for them to create endless dark energy, giving them a food source for the rest of time while giving them so much more power than they truly need to survive. As the Cube Queen puts it, Reality Zero is their greatest prize. It has all the 0-point energy they need to do whatever they want. That plan is exactly what we saw enacted by the original cube. It placed runes around the island, and these runes contain the same sort of glyphs we see in the sideways cubes, which tells me those are the runes used to extract darkness from the 0-point energy. This format of placing runes in a hexagon form is the last reality's decomposing ritual. Once the cube placed the code needed to crack the 0-point's energy, it went to Loot Lake and merged with it. This connected the cube to the water systems that flowed throughout the island, making it easy to harvest any 0-point energy existing in the island using the runes it placed to turn it into a whole lot of dark energy that grow its power. And that's exactly what happened. The cube rose out of the lake, far more powerful than it was before, and still there was more energy to be consumed. You could even see an entrance to the 0-point formed underneath it, showing that it was collecting the 0-point's power. It revisited the runes, further using the ritual to gain more power, and then it returned to Loot Lake, emanating with dark energy, and opened a portal in the sky. This portal was likely to the last reality. Its purpose was to send all the dark energy it could harvest from the 0-point to the last reality so they could gain power. However, this single cube might have been too small a thread between the 0-point and the last reality to hold so much power, as it became unstable and let out a shockwave during this, damaging it and causing it to slowly crumble. As it crumbled, a liquid oozed out of it, dripping into the entrance to the 0-point. That liquid was probably the 0-point energy it was holding falling out because the cube was damaged. Once all the energy had left the cube, it began to chaotically spin and lose color, similarly to when the blue cube shed its glyphs. However, this time the cube itself was damaged, not just its code, and this created a chaotic explosion that brought us into the in-between. In the in-between, we saw a rift butterfly form. I think this rift butterfly was the persona of the rift that was used to form the cube, tying together all my evidence neatly. Rift powers cube decomposes it into slurp and sideways, last reality uses sideways, cube continues to decompose surrounding 0-point energy to feed the last reality, bada bang, bada boom, we have a working theory. Phew! Jeez, that was a lot to unpack. So let's go back to what led us here in the first place. How did the looper bring out the light in the blue cube? Well, I don't have much of an exact explanation, but it must root down to something in or on the loopers allowing them to convert 0-point energy into slurp. The IO pack? The player reboot system? Or my favorite theory, the loopers themselves are considered an organism that can break down 0-point energy into slurp merely by them being looped, especially because back in Chapter 2 Season 5, the 0-point could give players full health. I actually have a lot to say about the 0-point that season, especially Zero Crisis, if you couldn't tell by my rant about the Spire. But I have some other information about the 0-point and how it relates to Ecology I want to get into first. Let's start off with the reality tree, since I think it's a good reference for a lot of the main characteristics of the 0-point. It's sort of like a manifestation of the 0-point in plant form. Let's think of the reality tree as Reality Zero, and its roots like the 0-point's connections to other realities. We see in the in-between how the 0-point has these beams that expand across reality, and we've also seen how the 0-point has been able to connect to other realities, opening portals and crossing them over. This parallels forest root systems in real life. Trees and forests can connect to each other using their roots, sometimes even forming symbiotic relationships with mushrooms to aid this process. They do this to work in harmony and share nutrients, which can be helpful for trees that aren't in especially nutrient-rich spots, or when trees are endangered by pests. When the trees share their nutrients, they can help their fellow trees heal and grow. stabilizing the forest and ensuring the ecosystem stays in harmony. We see the reality tree function similarly, as it spreads its roots across the island, allowing for other realities and their properties to break through, as shown in the bloom zones. We can see how in the bloom zones there were actually smaller reality trees arriving. These could very well be manifestations of those universes taking shape on the island. I will say though, with how the bloom zones cycle through different versions each match, it's possible either the smaller reality trees were also changing each match, or reality trees actually encompass multiverses rather than single universes. However, this might not be especially relevant. I'll just use reality as an umbrella term for now when talking about what the smaller reality trees represent. The reality tree for Reality Zero acts as the mother tree for the Omniverse, which makes sense because it's where the 0 point is. It comes with the name 0 point. It's the center of the Omniverse, like how it looks in the in-between. This means it acts as a hub where, even though not all realities can be directly connected, all realities are connected to Reality Zero, allowing Reality Zero to be the center point in which all of reality can connect and share nutrients. This might even be why the 0 point takes a physical form at all. That high traffic of energy passing through Reality Zero may center itself and take the shape of the 0 point. But I'm getting too theoretical at this point. To me, this is very blatantly a purposeful representation of how the 0 point works, and how all of reality works. Reality works in harmony like an ecosystem, to thrive, reproduce, and recycle. At least if we're going with the idea that since the Big Bang, the creation of the 0 point, the matter the 0 point arrived with was the only amount of matter the Omniverse could have, and that it can't be created nor destroyed, only recycled. Well, even if not, I can confidently say that Omniverse behaves like a forest. This is also supported by how the rest of the reality tree biome manifests itself. Like how I said prior, trees can form symbiotic relationships with fungi, using their mycelium, their fungi roots, to connect to other tree roots. And the reality tree biome is rich with mushrooms. There have also been other times when the 0 point has shown its connection to other realities in ways outside the in-between or the reality tree, like with the 0 point tendrils. Like how the reality tree can be considered a plant manifestation of the 0 point, the roots of the reality tree could be considered a plant manifestation of the 0 point tendrils. As I explained, the roots show the 0 points, and more broadly, Reality Zero's connection to the rest of the Omniverse. The tendrils of the 0 point have the same connection. We've seen them manifest in Zero Crisis when reality was breaking down, opening gaps to other realities. We've seen them in Fracture when the 0 point was able to reach out to other realities, grabbing fragments of them to form a new island. We've also seen them connecting realities in the Big Bang event. All of this is just like root systems, like how they connect trees and share nutrients. Using this, we can finally solve what was actually happening in Chapter 2, Season 5 in the Zero Crisis finale that was straining the 0 point so much, because it was directly related to the 0 point tendrils. Let's go through the Zero Crisis finale step by step to unpack it with this newfound knowledge. The Foundation starts off by opening the 0 point shards, getting a better look of the inside of the 0 point. He questions,
"What did you do to the 0 point?"
So let's recap what the Imagine Order did. Jones was sent to bring strong hunters from all across the Omniverse to Reality Zero. He used a rift portal gun to do this. This is an example of how the IO uses natural functions of the 0 point for their gain, because as we know, the 0 point has connections to the entire Omniverse, meaning that the portal gun is artificial technology made by the IO to use that system to jump across reality. But clearly this use may have been more abusive than not. The Foundation states,
"With this level of entanglement, I don't know if I can fix it."
Using the portal gun tangled the 0 point's connections to the other realities, because of course Jones was jumping all across the Omniverse rapidly, without even giving the 0 point a chance to heal after those portals were crossed. We even see the Foundation at the 0 point untangling tendrils, showing that it is indeed about the 0 point's ability to connect to other realities, and also a nice clear view of how the 0 point carries tendrils from inside it. So does tendril entanglement translate to some form of root entanglement in real life? It sure does! This is called root girdling, when roots wrap around each other in the trunk of their tree so tight that it blocks off important nutrients and can't allow any outside nutrients to pass through it. If this goes on, the tree will become ill and eventually die. So in reality terms, that's very bad. Not only is the 0 point suffering, but that lack of healthy root connections will take the rest of reality down with it. Since, as I said, Reality Zero acts as a hub that any reality can pass nutrients through, so taking away a primary source of transportation could be catastrophic. Of course reality was breaking down. The Foundation continues,
"Once the 0 point starts to bloom, there's no going back."
We'll get into the Zero Bloom in a moment, but for now, I'm focusing on the tendrils. As the Foundation pulls out a massive entanglement, tendrils are let loose across the map, revealing gaps in reality. which were probably already forming prior as they were getting entangled. The Foundation just let them loose. Which makes sense because these gaps would essentially be the roots of reality bleeding out their nutrients. Not only is this bad for the flow of nutrients, but that's a lot of energy that would be bound to get some bad attention if left open for too long. Now we're introduced to reality waves.
Reality waves can change anything in the blink of...
Reality waves seem to work similarly to the bloom zones, letting other realities through. However, it's clearly a lot less controlled and more like a last-ditch effort to source nutrients from whatever realities the 0 point can. Once we close enough portals, the 0 point begins to bloom. So with all the other 0 point plant connections, of course the 0 point having a blooming function is important and has an ecological meaning. Flowers are the sexual organs of plants. They produce pollen, which carries the DNA of the plant, and this pollen attracts pollinators, which both feed on the pollen and carry the pollen to other flowers. When this pollen reaches other flowers, it fertilizes them, allowing those flowers to grow fruit and new seeds to be spread later on. I'm sure most of you already know some basic pollinators: bees, wasps, hummingbirds, and butterflies. Rift butterflies are the pollinators for the reality bloom. That's their purpose. They help carry energy for the 0 point in reality itself, to reproduce and spread new seeds to allow for new connections in the root systems. In the case of Zero Crisis, it makes sense for this to be what the Foundation resorts to. Because if the 0 point can't get nutrients itself or connect realities that need it, the only option is to open up new pathways for realities to get their nutrients to, on the slim chance it can work in time, help stabilize reality and prevent it from breaking down. This also connects to what I said about the rift butterflies, because the reason why butterflies feed on pollen is that it's their food source. So it seems like the bloom carries the nutrients that go through the slurp cycle that I talked about. As the reality bloom progresses, it forms an array of colors, which go from pink to blue to yellow. However, I'll be using the labels magenta, cyan, and yellow as umbrella terms for the overall hues since it's hard to pin down their exact colors. These colors are important, as we've seen the same sort of theming in cubes and butterflies. Flowers have bright colors to attract pollinators. They've even evolved to have specific colors to attract specific pollinators. There are cases where certain species of butterflies are more attracted to different colors. This could imply that the colors for various stages of the reality bloom are meant to attract specific rift butterflies for balance, especially given the fact that there are rift butterflies that correlate to each of the colors. This could mean that the bloom acts as a secondary food source for the butterflies, and it's very attractive to them. I'd imagine that a food source that's connected to the 0 point would host a lot of energy for rift butterflies to thrive on. In that case, how this reflects with real-world ecology is that the rift butterflies feeding on slurp-filled plants I talked about before would be equivalent to a butterfly drinking sap from a tree, while their more ecologically important role, which would be drinking nectar from flowers and spreading the pollen from it in real life, is feeding on the nectar of the reality bloom and spreading it across reality. Also, that magenta and cyan, yeah, I think that's another example of dark and light and how they connect to the 0 point, since, as I said before, they line up with colors we've seen in the cubes and the butterflies. So I guess this means if rift butterflies are feeding on that pollen, they can also consume components of the sideways. I mean, there are sideways anomalies, which are essentially sideways versions of the rifts. So I wonder if that anomaly can be the result of a rift butterfly consuming way too much sideways energy, which would begin to tear it apart because it's not a decomposer, so it's not really meant to consume it, and sideways energy is destructive at its core. However, in the end, darkness and destruction play a huge role in the stability of life, and reality. So I see why the Zero Bloom would include it. Once a reality bloom is fully formed, it emits an aura, which reminds me a bit of the scent flowers give off to attract pollinators. This could be important to figuring out what the colors mean, because despite the reality bloom itself including yellow, this may mean that yellow isn't a power in the same way cyan and magenta are. However, shortly after this aura is shown, the reality bloom turns red and begins to decay, letting off a foggy black and scarlet red mist. This is when the chromium appears, which I already got into enough in this video. It's a defense mechanism for the 0 point that damages the ecosystem of the Omniverse, but inevitably keeps it safe. So we know that the magenta connects to dark energy and cyan connects to light energy. So what could the yellow be? I'm still not entirely sure, and that's been nagging at me for years. My thought is that it's like a conductor for either power or even a reproducer, considering how in real life a queen's role in a beehive is reproduction, and we've witnessed the cube queen and her yellow cube mate with other cubes to produce offspring. She does seem to be the mother of all cubes. After all, she calls them her children. Or at least she calls the servants of the last reality her children. However you take it, I guess. I'd also like to call back to other times we've seen that yellow goldish energy be used, such as the device event. If I'm right about it being a conductor, this would definitely be an example of it conducting light energy to push back against dark as the device battles the storm. I really want to put emphasis on the yellow energy's distinct goldness. as Midas is all about gold. And he built the device. I wonder if he was aware of the conductive energy gold creates and used his powers to build the device, setting up a system that would create the conductive yellow energy. I feel like we're getting too hypothetical though. I suppose if we're to fit into the balance of dark and light, maybe it's as simple as representing reality itself. Think about it. We've seen light dimensions, we've seen dark dimensions, and we've seen them affect the omniverse, but no extra dimension that fits the yellow, so maybe we're already in it. That gold energy might be exactly what the followers of light and dark seek out so desperately. It's control over reality, a prize to be won, which might be why the Cube Queen wears it. Being the highest ranking of her legion, such a power would be fitting to be bestowed upon her. It seems like the last reality has been pretty successful in their rampage for this power too, considering their yellow technology and a whole lot of yellow cubes on the cube's cradle. I actually feel pretty confident about both these insights since the conductor idea can also fit into this. It also makes sense for the last reality to have such a huge gain of the yellow power, considering the size of their fleets and how widespread they seem to be across the omniverse. They've taken so much of reality, and the gold energy is their treasure. They may feed on darkness, but they gluttonize over gold. What is this, Mr. Beast? I'd also like to add on to this that the yellow rifts are used by the Cube Queen to open an incredibly large portal for the last reality to come through, showing its power. This could mean the yellow rifts are similar to base rifts, only that their power is much more amplified. You can also look back on the looper teleporting into the IO base during the device event as the yellow energy malfunctioning, causing anomalies connecting parts of reality. So, let's do a review. Reality Zero is the mother tree of the omniverse, channeling zero-point energy through it to spread across universes, keeping them stable. We saw this personified with the reality tree and the smaller versions of it, which seem to represent other realities that the zero-point was connecting to the island as it fed them nutrients. The reality bloom is a mechanism of the zero-point to attract rift butterflies so they can feed on its pollen and spread zero-point energy across the omniverse. It contains 3 balancing powers of existence: light, dark, and reality. Rift butterflies also feed on some sort of slurp compound from plants, digesting it into zero-point energy. This makes rift butterflies a useful source of zero-point energy for decomposers, such as the new bugs, which feed on dark energy that's in the zero-point energy, while separating it from the light. This creates the sideways, a compound of dark energy, and the slurp, a compound of light energy. The slurp is released into the ecosystem to be fed on by plants, which will then create more slurp compounds for the rift butterflies to eat. And then the cycle persists. The last reality consists of more decomposers who feed on the dark energy from the zero point, and they scour the omniverse for dark energy, amplifying their power. They also seek out reality energy, giving them strength and status for their fight for the omniverse. Light energy can heal, dark energy can destroy, and reality energy can be used as a conductor for both. We've seen light energy heavily take over the island with the slurp, and we've seen dark energy heavily take over the island with the sideways. Cubes are tools used by the last reality that are powered by zero-point energy. The last reality kills them using glyphs to spread dark energy and conduct rituals to source zero-point energy and turn it back into dark energy that's fed to the last reality, as we saw the original cube do in Chapter 1. Although, it seems like that much power going through a single cube such as that one will eventually damage it, cutting off its connection to the zero-point energy in the last reality, causing it to explode, releasing the zero-point energy stored in it. This zero-point energy is often sourced from rifts, and specifically rift butterflies. So when the cube exploded, it released a rift butterfly. Additionally, this explosion of energy might have released healing light energy onto the surrounding area, as Loot Lake was turned into a peaceful plant-filled paradise following it. We've also seen cubes turn to their light setting in Skyfire, where the looper reboots a cube, turning it into a friendly blue cube that's been shown to heal and protect. Chromium forming around the zero point is a last-ditch defense mechanism for the zero point, preserving it but damaging reality as a whole. It cuts off the zero point's connection to the rest of reality, slowing the flow of nutrients, and might even damage it toxically if I'm right about the chromium being hexavalent chromium. Chromium has been studied and used by the last reality to help them in their goals as chrome, giving them a tool that quickly decomposes any matter, turning it into chrome. It also gives certain genetically modified species, such as the Herald, the ability to recreate the zero point's chromium defense mechanism with the chrome, preserving them as they seal themselves and their surroundings in chrome. That's roughly everything, right? This is such a long video, it's hard to keep track of everything I've said. Here, let's finish up this video with a quick round of facts related to everything I didn't get to fit in. Rough butterflies were spotted many times on the island as anomalies during Primal, which is probably because they were led there by the brief reality bloom in Zero Crisis. The 0 point had been turning purple throughout Chapter 2 Season 5, showing how it was being destabilized by Jones's reality hopping. Maybe it was simply set off balance and began leaning towards darkness as this happened. Or it's an example of the 0 point's power deteriorating like how purple dark energy destroys. Or maybe there was an external source like the last reality taking the 0 point's energy while it was vulnerable. Raz is a clear example of how the last reality decomposed the 0 point energy to draw out dark energy using glyphs. When Raz got his hands on the 0 point crystal, we can see that 0 point energy began flowing through his body, and he became covered in cube-like glyphs. As the player fought against him as a boss, you could see him drawing out dark energy from the crystal to use against the player. There are also two powers I think are related to this dark, light, and reality stuff. Enchantments and curses, both powers related to the spirit realm. Enchantments seem to pretty simply be use of light energy to power materials such as weapons. Curses seem to be used by and on demons to restrain them to the dark presence. However, the curses appear in red energy. In fact, all of the demons do. So what are both of these powers and how do they relate to the spirit realm? Well, that's too loaded of a question for me to fit into this video. But I plan to release a video with a developed look into the spirit realm in the future. Don't get your hopes up for that being in the near future though. Let me be clear too, I'm the best person to ask about that stuff. And I don't just say that as an egomaniac. I've talked about the spirit realm before most of the community realized it was relevant all the way back in early 2023. And speaking of, if you want some insight on enchantment and the past of the spirit realm in the Fortnite storyline, go check that video out, despite its staggering quality. What are your thoughts on all this? Any theories? Any objections? Let me know in the comments. For the record, I'm not actually sure where my channel's headed. I thought I might continue on the animation path, but I think I might have more fun on these Fortnite storyline videos. So I guess I'll just do whatever comes to me in the moment. Anyways, have a pie, and goodbye.